A stone tower stands completely sealed, with no entrance at ground level. This is not a forgotten ruin, but a deliberate message from the Middle Ages, a silent sermon carved in stone. These doorless towers scattered across Europe present an architectural paradox that defies simple explanation. By the end of this exploration, you will possess the key to decoding their hidden symbolic blueprint. We will uncover why master builders invested immense effort into constructing seemingly inaccessible monuments and what secret knowledge they were trying to protect. What does it mean when architecture deliberately turns its back on the everyday world? A solid cylinder of stone rises from the earth, its surface unbroken by any doorway. This is the reality of the doorless tower, a structure designed from the very first stone to deny entry. Picture it standing alone in a field, or perhaps tucked within the walls of an old monastery, its smooth walls reaching up 30 feet or more to a conical roof. Narrow slit windows dot the upper levels, but the base offers only cold, impassive masonry. The immediate and obvious question is not a matter of subtle symbolism, but of pure practicality. How did anyone get inside? The builders themselves had to enter to complete the upper levels. The answer is as clever as it is revealing. The entrance was never meant to be at ground level. It was constructed high up on the wall, accessible only by a removable wooden ladder or a retractable staircase. Once that ladder was pulled up, the tower became a fortress, a sanctuary, or a vault, utterly isolated from the world below. This is not a design flaw, it is the entire point. Consider the round towers of Ireland, built by monastic communities between the 9th and 12th centuries. These slender, tapering towers served as bell towers and lookout posts, but their most vital function was as a refuge during Viking raids. Monks would haul their precious manuscripts and sacred relics up the ladder and then pull it up after them, leaving invaders baffled at the base of an unscalable smooth stone wall. Similarly, certain structures associated with the Knights Templar feature this same puzzling architecture, suggesting a shared language of sacred protection. The very impracticality of the design, the deliberate effort required for entry, screams its purpose. It was not meant to keep people out in a simple military sense. It was meant to create a threshold, a barrier so significant that crossing it transformed the very act of entry into a ritual. The physical challenge of reaching that high door was the first lesson the building taught. This deliberate separation from the earthly plane mirrors a core belief of the age. Medieval society viewed the physical world as a temporary and often dangerous testing ground, a veil of illusion separating humanity from the divine. The most valued treasures were not gold or land, but spiritual salvation, a state of grace that required constant effort to attain. It was a world obsessed with journeys, both physical and metaphysical. Thousands embarked on pilgrimages to holy sites, enduring immense hardship to reach a sacred destination, believing the difficulty of the path itself purified the soul. The Crusades were, in part, a massive, violent expression of this same yearning to reclaim a holy place. In this worldview, anything easily obtained was considered of little worth. True value was measured by the struggle required to achieve it. This mindset transforms the doorless tower from a bizarre architectural choice into a perfectly logical statement. The tower itself becomes a destination for a miniature pilgrimage. To enter, one had to make a conscious effort to ascend literally and symbolically, leaving the mundane world behind. The act of climbing that precarious ladder was a reenactment of the soul's difficult ascent toward heaven. The building was a physical prayer, a permanent instruction on the nature of the spiritual path. Consider the immense cost and labor involved in building such a structure. Quarrying the stone, transporting it, and employing skilled masons represented a massive investment for any community, especially a monastic one living in relative simplicity. They would not have committed such resources to a mere folly. The tower's impracticality was precisely what made it priceless. It stood as a daily reminder to the entire community that the most important things in life, like faith and salvation, are not accessible by a casual stroll through an open door. They require intention, effort, and a deliberate turning away from the ordinary. This context allows us to see these silent towers not as empty ruins, but as vessels humming with the anxieties and aspirations of an entire era. That smooth, unbroken wall is the first and most important symbol. It declares that the treasures within are not of this earth. The most immediate reading of the Doorless Tower is as a grand metaphor for spiritual ascent, a stone ladder reaching for heaven. Its sheer verticality is a direct challenge to the horizontal plane of everyday life, a life spent moving across the land in pursuit of worldly concerns. The tower, by contrast, points in a single, uncompromising direction, up. It aims straight for the celestial, physically enacting the soul's own difficult journey toward God. The complete absence of a door at ground level makes a profound theological statement. It says that spiritual enlightenment cannot be accessed through ordinary, worldly means. You cannot simply walk into grace as you would walk into a house. True connection with the divine requires you to be lifted up, an act that implies both personal effort and the necessity of grace or divine intervention. This was not an abstract idea. Medieval mystics like Hildegard of Bingen described their spiritual experiences in precisely these terms, as an arduous ascent through layered realms of consciousness toward a brilliant, unifying light. The tower gives this intensely personal, abstract concept a permanent, tangible form for the entire community to witness. Even the narrow slit windows serve this symbolic function. They are not primarily for looking out at the surrounding countryside. Their purpose is to allow slender shafts of divine light to pierce the darkness within the tower. This light would then guide the ascent of anyone inside, whether a praying monk or simply the silent, waiting space itself. Each beam becomes a visual representation of grace, a pinpoint of celestial guidance illuminating the difficult path upward. In this first layer of meaning, the tower is not just a building, it is a spiritual map carved in stone, a three-dimensional sermon on the nature of salvation. But this ascent toward the divine was only one layer of the tower's silent message. Its sealed base also created a perfect vessel for secrecy, a sanctuary for knowledge deemed too potent for the common world. In an age where literacy was rare and orthodoxy was fiercely guarded, certain ideas required protection. The tower's design suggests it was less a library and more a fortress for the mind, built to shield arcane wisdom from both physical destruction and casual comprehension. This was not about hoarding knowledge out of malice, but about preserving its purity from a world often hostile to complexity. The truths it might hold could range from sacred geometrical principles believed to underpin God's creation, to heretical theological debates, or even apocalyptic prophecies calculated to unsettle the established order. The very inaccessibility of the space declared that not everyone was meant to know what was inside. This concept resonates deeply with medieval legends like the quest for the Holy Grail. In these stories, the Grail is never found in a public square or a busy church. It rests in a hidden castle, a spiritual fortress that reveals itself only to the purest of heart after a grueling quest. The seeker must prove their worth through trials of faith and character. The Doorless Tower operates on the same principle. Its high, hidden entrance, reachable only by a ladder that can be withdrawn, is a physical test. Gaining entry demands more than just physical ability. It requires intention, perseverance, and perhaps a form of initiation. The building itself acts as the gatekeeper, ensuring that only those who understand the significance of the effort and are therefore prepared for the revelation can cross its threshold. This transforms the tower from a simple monument into an active participant in a ritual of revelation. The knowledge it protects is not simply information to be read, but a state of understanding to be earned. The climb to that lone window becomes the final, physical step in a much longer internal journey of preparation. In this light, the tower is not empty, even if its stone rooms hold no physical scrolls. It is filled with the potent silence of protected meaning, a permanent challenge to any who would look upon it, asking if they are truly ready to seek what lies beyond ordinary sight. These master builders understood their craft as a form of philosophy in stone. To see them as simple laborers is to miss the entire purpose of their work. They were members of exclusive guilds, sworn brotherhoods that protected secrets not of brick and mortar, but of line and proportion. Their knowledge was a sacred trust, a continuous thread stretching back through time to the geometric mysteries of ancient Greece and Egypt. For them, building was a spiritual act, a way of bringing divine order down to earth. The perfect ratios they used were believed to be the very same mathematical principles God used to fashion the universe. A building constructed according to these sacred rules would resonate with the harmony of the cosmos itself, becoming a conduit between heaven and earth. This is the profound intellectual framework behind the Doorless Tower. Its design was not an eccentric whim, it was a calculated geometric sermon. The choice of a circular footprint was deeply intentional. Unlike a square which is rooted in the four directions of the earthly plane, the circle is the shape of the heavens of perfection and unity, having no beginning and no end. It symbolizes eternity. By building a cylindrical tower, the masons were creating a microcosm of the celestial realm, a slice of heaven anchored to the ground, yet deliberately separated from it by that impassable wall. Even their most basic tools were layered with meaning. The square represented morality, the right angles symbolizing honesty, solidity, and the virtues of a well-ordered life on earth. The compass used to draw perfect circles represented the spirit, the divine spark that seeks to transcend the material world and return to its source. Together, these tools were emblems of the builder's mission to unite the earthly with the heavenly. When a master mason laid out the foundation for a doorless tower, he was not just following a blueprint, he was enacting a ritual. Every stone placed was a word in a silent argument about the nature of reality, a permanent statement that the path to truth is not a gentle slope but a vertical climb. The tower itself was his ultimate lecture, a university in a single structure, teaching all who beheld it that the most valuable treasures are kept not behind locked doors, but at the top of a ladder that must be earned. This mathematical perfection was etched into every aspect of the tower's design. The circle is the foundational symbol, a line with no beginning and no end, representing the eternal nature of God and the unified cosmos. By choosing a cylindrical form, the builders were not just making a strong wall, they were physically manifesting this concept of divine perfection on earth. But the geometry went far deeper than the simple shape. The proportions of the tower were meticulously calculated using sacred ratios. The most revered of these was the golden ratio, a mathematical relationship found throughout nature, from the spiral of a seashell to the arrangement of leaves on a stem. Medieval thinkers saw this ratio as proof of a divine blueprint underlying all of creation, a hidden signature of the architect of the universe. when a master mason designed a tower so that its height was to its width as the golden ratio dictates, he was not just creating a pleasing form, he was weaving the very fabric of God's design into the stone. The building became a deliberate echo of the natural world, a man-made structure harmonizing with the fundamental order of everything. This alignment extended to the heavens above. The narrow slit windows were not randomly placed. They were often positioned with astonishing precision to capture the first ray of sunlight on the summer solstice, or to frame a specific star like Polaris, the North Star. On those special days, a beam of light would pierce the darkness inside, striking a particular spot on the far wall or the central floor. This transformed the static stone tower into a dynamic astronomical instrument, a giant calendar marking the sacred rhythms of the year. It connected the small, human scale of the building to the vast, cosmic clockwork of the universe. This was not arbitrary decoration, it was a profound statement. The Doorless Tower was designed as a microcosm, a perfect miniature model of the created order. Its sealed base represented the solid, material Earth. Its soaring height represented the celestial realms, and the precise geometric and astronomical alignments within were the invisible threads connecting the two. The entire structure was a single, coherent sentence written in the language of mathematics, declaring that heaven and earth, though separated, are bound together by an intelligible divine law. To stand before such a tower was to be in the presence of a diagram of reality itself. The round towers of Ireland offer the perfect test for our symbolic blueprint. Scattered across the Irish landscape, these slender stone spires, some reaching over 100 feet high, present a clear architectural puzzle. Their doors are consistently positioned high above the ground, often 10 to 15 feet in the air. The standard historical explanation is practical. They were bell towers for monasteries and, crucially, refuges during Viking raids. Monks would scramble up a removable ladder with their sacred relics and manuscripts, pulling the ladder up behind them to safety. This is a compelling and true story of survival, yet it does not fully explain the design. If the only goal was safety, why not simply build a strong door at ground level, one that could be barred from within? A high door is a slower, more cumbersome way to escape an attacking force. The choice implies that the difficulty of entry was a feature, not a bug. This is where the older, deeper layers of meaning resurface. Many of these towers were constructed on sites already considered sacred for centuries, places previously associated with pagan beliefs. In the pre-Christian worldview, certain locations were seen as axis mundi, world pillars or sacred centers that connected the earthly realm to the spiritual one. A tall, prominent tree or a large standing stone could serve as this axis. By building their round towers on these very spots, the early Christian church was engaging in a powerful act of symbolic appropriation. They were not erasing the old belief in a world pillar, they were redirecting it. The new stone tower became the new axis mundi, a Christian ladder to heaven that physically and spiritually overshadowed the pagan past. The high door completes this symbolic transformation. It physically enforces the idea that the sacred space within is separate from the profane world below. The monk climbing the ladder is not just escaping Vikings, he is reenacting the soul's ascent. Each rung represents a step away from worldly concerns and toward divine contemplation. The interior of the tower, dark and quiet, pierced only by shafts of light from the narrow windows, becomes a sensory deprivation chamber designed for spiritual focus. The ladder itself is the key. It is the element of grace and effort, the necessary tool without which the ascent is impossible. And its removability is the ultimate statement of control over this sacred boundary. The community could decide when the connection between heaven and earth was open or closed. This case study shows how our framework of symbolic meaning and practical necessity intertwine. The round towers served a vital defensive purpose, yes, but their enduring power comes from their dual role. They were both fortress and sermon, protecting bodies while educating souls. They stand as a perfect example of how medieval builders wove profound spiritual concepts into the very fabric of everyday survival, creating a landscape where every stone told a story of peril and transcendence. The Knights Templar built not just fortresses but stone enigmas. While their round churches are famous, certain lesser-known Templar structures present an even deeper architectural puzzle. At sites like Toma in Portugal or La Couvertoirade in France, you can find towers and chambers whose original access points are ambiguous, sealed, or deliberately obscured over time. For an order shrouded in myth and bound by vows of secrecy, this architectural choice becomes a powerful statement. The doorless or hard-to-reach tower could symbolize the impregnable fortress of their faith, a spiritual citadel that worldly forces could never breach. It might also reflect the hidden knowledge they were rumored to guard, esoteric wisdom, perhaps brought back from their excavations beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. The geometry employed by the Templars often moves beyond the simple circle into more complex forms. The octagon appears with notable frequency in their chapels and castles. This eight-sided shape carried profound meaning in medieval symbolism, representing resurrection and rebirth. It is the shape of many early Christian baptisteries, where the faithful are reborn through water, and it also echoes the dome of the rock in Jerusalem, the very site they sought to protect. By incorporating the octagon into a tower's design, the Templars were layering their architecture with a silent promise of spiritual renewal for those who proved worthy. The orientation of these structures was rarely accidental. A Templar tower might be precisely aligned not to the local sunrise, but toward the distant city of Jerusalem itself. For a knight who had spent years fighting in the Holy Land, standing in that tower and looking out through a narrow window along that specific sightline would be a powerful act of remembrance and devotion. It physically connected his current, perhaps peaceful, post to the spiritual center of his order's crusade. The building became a permanent prayer, a stone compass pointing always toward Zion. This transforms the idea of a doorless tower from a general spiritual metaphor into a specific declaration of identity. It was not merely an ascent toward heaven, but an ascent toward a particular vision of a heavenly kingdom on earth, one the Templars had pledged their lives to defend. The difficulty of entry then becomes a test of allegiance. To enter such a space, one had to already understand the significance of the geometry, the alignment, and the history it represented. The architecture itself ensured that only an initiate, someone who could read the symbolic language of the stones, would comprehend the true purpose of the climb. In this light, the Templar Tower is less a refuge and more a key, a three-dimensional cipher waiting for the right mind to unlock its meaning. This same yearning for a sacred space beyond the world echoes far beyond the castles and monasteries of Europe. Our exploration must be global, for the symbolic blueprint of the Doorless Tower finds a profound parallel in the mystical traditions of the Islamic world, particularly within Sufism. The Naqshbandiya Sufi order, for instance, speaks of a soundless word and a doorless castle. This is not a description of a physical building, but a powerful metaphor for the human heart as the true seat of divine connection. In this view, the heart becomes a spiritual fortress, its gates inaccessible to the clamor of worldly desires and ego. To enter this inner castle, one must transcend the ordinary self through meditation, prayer, and ascetic practices. The path is not one of physical ascent but of internal purification, a journey inward to a center that is deliberately sealed off from the distractions of everyday life. The parallel is striking, whether in the stone of a European tower or the poetry of a Sufi master. We see the same core idea, the creation of a protected sanctuary that can only be reached by turning away from the mundane. This philosophical kinship reveals that the impulse is not uniquely Christian or medieval, but a universal human response to the spiritual quest. It suggests that the blueprint we are decoding taps into a fundamental archetype of the human psyche, a shared understanding that the most profound truths are not found on the open road, but at the end of a difficult, personal path of seeking. The architecture simply gives this inner reality an outer, permanent form. By seeing this pattern repeated across cultures, the doorless towers of Europe cease to be isolated curiosities. They become local expressions of a global intuition, stone manifestations of a truth that mystics everywhere have tried to articulate, the truth that the divine is not a public spectacle but a hidden treasure, waiting for those willing to make the climb. This defiance of function is the tower's loudest message. A building that refuses to be entered in the normal way stops being just a building and becomes a question. It forces anyone who looks at it to wonder why. Why would a community pour its resources into a structure that seems to reject the very people who built it? The answer lies in understanding that its impracticality is not a flaw, but the central feature. The sealed base is a deliberate act of refusal against the ordinary world. It declares that the treasures inside, whether they are sacred relics or profound ideas, are of a different order than grain stored in a barn or coins locked in a chest. They cannot be accessed by the same means. The tower functions as an architectural riddle, a puzzle in stone meant to break our habitual way of thinking. We are so accustomed to judging a thing by its utility, by what it can do for us in a practical sense. This tower challenges that entire framework. Its value is not in what it holds, but in what it teaches us about how to acquire what is truly valuable. The medieval world viewed faith and enlightenment not as possessions to be collected, but as states of being to be earned through struggle and transformation. An open door suggests something is freely available, common, and perhaps not worth much. A door that requires a difficult ascent, however, implies a treasure of immense worth, reserved for those willing to undertake the journey. This paradox echoes the core of many spiritual traditions, where the path to wisdom is described as narrow, steep, and gate-kept by challenges. The doorless tower makes this abstract spiritual truth physically, undeniably present in the landscape. It is a permanent monument to the principle that the most meaningful destinations are never easy to reach. Every time a farmer looked up from his field and saw that smooth, unbroken wall, he received a silent sermon on the hierarchy of values. The tower's enduring presence, long after the ladders have rotted away, continues to ask us the same question it asked people centuries ago. Are we still looking for the easy door, or are we prepared to seek out the ladder? Silence and shadow were not empty spaces but active elements of the design. Within the tower's dark interior, the precise placement of each narrow window served a purpose far beyond ventilation. These openings were calibrated with the precision of a master watchmaker, designed not to offer a view of the world outside, but to capture and direct celestial light. On an ordinary day, the interior would be a realm of deep twilight, pierced only by sharp, brilliant shafts of sunlight that traveled slowly across the stone floor like the hand of a clock. This daily performance was a gentle reminder of the sun's journey, a constant, quiet rhythm of light and dark, but on specific hallowed days of the year, the building revealed its true genius. At the exact moment of the summer solstice, the longest day, a single beam might strike a carefully carved mark on the far wall, a sign that the sun had reached its peak and the cycle of the year was turning. During the winter solstice, a low, angled ray could illuminate a symbol on the floor, a promise of the returning light. The tower itself became a giant astronomical instrument, a stone calendar marking the sacred seasons. This choreography of light transformed the space from a mere room into a dynamic participant in ritual. Imagine a monk standing in that darkness, watching as a sliver of sunlight slowly intensifies to spotlight a sacred relic or illuminate a page of scripture. This was not a random event, it was a scheduled moment of divine communication, a tactile experience of heavenly order. The dramatic contrast between the enveloping shadow and the sudden, piercing beam created a cathedral-like atmosphere on a miniature scale, focusing the mind and elevating a simple prayer into a profound encounter. The path of light across the floor became a visual guide for meditation, a literal and symbolic illumination of the inner path toward understanding. In this way, the building did not just house spirituality, it actively generated it, using the fundamental elements of the cosmos to teach its timeless lessons. Stone is not a silent material. The smooth, cylindrical chamber of a doorless tower was an acoustic instrument as carefully designed as any pipe organ. Every spoken word, every footstep, every breath would have been caught and transformed by the hard, curved walls. A single monk chanting a psalm would not hear his own voice fade away. Instead, it would linger, echoing back upon itself, layering sound upon sound to create a thick, resonant texture that filled the entire space. This was not an accidental byproduct of the design, it was an essential feature. In an era before electronic amplification, architecture was the primary technology for shaping sound and, by extension, spiritual experience. The reverberation created a sense of immense presence, making a solitary prayer feel as if it were being joined by an unseen chorus. In some towers, the acoustics might have been so precise as to create a whispering gallery effect, where a word spoken softly against one wall could be heard with perfect clarity on the opposite side. This auditory magic would have felt like a direct manifestation of the divine, a secret channel of communication operating on a frequency inaccessible to the outside world. This orchestration of sound connected directly to one of the most powerful ideas in medieval thought, the concept of the music of the spheres. Philosophers and theologians believed the cosmos itself was not silent. The planets, as they moved through their perfect celestial orbits, were thought to produce a sublime harmonic hum, a music of perfect mathematical proportions that was the very sound of God's creation. Human ears, clouded by sin and the clamor of earthly life, were normally deaf to this cosmic symphony, but inside the tower, the architecture offered a solution. The amplified, resonant chant of a monk rising and falling in the darkness was an attempt to replicate that heavenly harmony on earth. The building became a tuning fork, its stone walls vibrating in sympathy with the human voice, creating a microcosm of the celestial order. The act of prayer was no longer just about the words being said. It was about the sound they created, a physical vibration that sought to align the small, human sphere of the tower with the vast musical sphere of the universe. This profound use of sound is balanced by an equally powerful use of its absence. The sealed door did more than block physical entry, it created a barrier against the noise of the world. Outside was the cacophony of medieval life, the sounds of animals, labor, and community. Inside, once the ladder was withdrawn, was an enforced and profound silence. This silence was not empty, it was fertile ground. It was a retreat from the distractions of the senses, a deliberate clearing of mental space to make room for a different kind of listening. Medieval mystics spoke of the still, small voice of God, a whisper of guidance that could only be heard when the soul was quiet and attentive. The tower's design manufactured the perfect conditions to hear that voice. The enveloping stone quiet, punctuated only by the resonant echoes of purposeful prayer, trained the mind to focus inward. The silence itself became a teacher, and the hollow, cylindrical form was its classroom, demonstrating that sometimes the most important messages are not shouted from the rooftops, but heard only in the most protected and secluded of spaces. The sturdiest walls of the tower are those we build within ourselves. This third layer of meaning transforms the grand architectural symbol into an intimate guide for the human soul. If the tower represents the cosmos on a grand scale, it also serves as a perfect model for the individual on a microcosmic one. The stone shell becomes a powerful metaphor for the physical body, a temporary but resilient structure designed to house something infinitely more precious. Its solid, unbroken base declares the sanctity of the inner life, the private world of thought, faith, and conscience that must be protected from constant external pressure. Just as the tower's entrance is high above the common ground, the true essence of a person is not something that can be casually accessed or violated by outside forces. It is a fortress of the self. This introspective reading gives the medieval blueprint a deeply personal dimension. The narrow windows positioned high on the wall perfectly illustrate this principle. They represent the human senses and the faculty of intellect. These are the openings through which we perceive the world and through which divine inspiration can enter our consciousness. But their placement is crucial. They are not at ground level, open to every passing distraction or base temptation. They are elevated, requiring us to lift our gaze, to be selective about what we allow to influence our inner world. This design teaches a lesson in mindful engagement with the world, encouraging a focus on higher ideas rather than being mired in the muddle of fleeting desires. The entire structure, then, becomes an instruction manual for inner construction. The effort required to build a physical tower mirrors the discipline needed to cultivate a strong, virtuous character. Each stone laid is like a good habit formed, a truth embraced, or a temptation resisted, slowly creating a fortified and resilient self. The darkness inside the tower is not emptiness but the fertile ground of contemplation, where the noise of the world fades and one can hear the quiet voice of conscience or prayer. The shafts of light entering through the windows are those moments of clarity, grace, and understanding that illuminate our path when we create the right conditions for them to appear. This idea resonates powerfully with the spiritual exercises of medieval mystics, who spoke of retreating into the inner castle of the soul to seek direct communion with God. Their writings describe a journey inward through layers of ego and distraction to reach a central, silent chamber where the divine resides. The Doorless Tower is the architectural expression of this very journey. It tells us that true spiritual security is not found by building higher walls against others, but by turning our attention inward and upward, ensuring that the windows of our perception are aligned with the light of truth. The tower stands not just as a monument in a field, but as a challenge to every individual, asking if we have built our own inner sanctuary strong enough to protect the treasure within. These principles of ascent and separation did not end with the last stone laid on a medieval tower. The symbolic blueprint proved remarkably resilient, its core ideas translating seamlessly into new ages and new materials. The most direct descendants are the impossibly tall spires of Gothic cathedrals. While the main body of the cathedral was open to the public, the spire itself was often inaccessible, a needle of stone piercing the clouds. It served no practical function for the congregation below. Its purpose was purely symbolic, a permanent, visible prayer reaching from the community straight to God. The spire was the doorless tower refined and amplified, its message of spiritual aspiration made even more explicit and breathtaking. Centuries later, the same impulse finds expression in the glass and steel of the modern skyscraper. At first glance, these seem to be the ultimate rejection of medieval thinking, built for pure profit and efficiency. Yet look closer. Their sheer verticality is a direct echo of the old towers, a defiant gesture against the horizontal plane of the city streets. Their gleaming, reflective facades create a similar effect of inaccessible grandeur, a world of power and decision-making that feels removed from the everyday life of the sidewalk. While they have many doors at ground level, the true centers of power, the boardrooms and executive suites, are often at the very top, reached by a private, high-speed elevator that is the modern equivalent of the retractable ladder. These buildings have become our secular cathedrals, temples not to divine grace but to human ambition and capital. They encode a modern meaning, a belief in progress and economic power as the new path to transcendence. The fact that we still build so relentlessly upward despite the immense cost and engineering challenges reveals a deep, perhaps unconscious, adherence to an ancient symbolic language. We may have traded stone for glass and the quest for salvation for the pursuit of success, but the human desire to build high, to create a visible marker of our highest values, remains an unbroken thread connecting the medieval mason to the modern architect. A purely practical watchtower demands rapid access, not a slow, precarious climb. Imagine the urgency of a sentinel spotting an approaching army, needing to scramble to his post to sound the alarm. A ladder that must be positioned and then hauled up becomes a fatal delay, not a strategic advantage. The same logic applies to a simple bell tower. The monks or townsfolk responsible for ringing the bells to mark the hours of prayer would require constant, easy entry. To subject such a daily, mundane task to the ritual of a difficult ascent makes little sense if efficiency were the primary goal. These practical functions were likely real, but they feel like secondary benefits, convenient uses for a structure whose fundamental design was conceived for a different, more profound reason. The consistent architectural choice across different regions and centuries points to a shared ideology, not just a shared solution to a common problem. The inconvenience is the message. It tells us that what happened inside this tower was not an ordinary activity. It was an event set apart, an endeavor that warranted the extra effort because its value was measured on a different scale entirely. This design elevates the purpose of the tower from a mere function to a sacred act. The sealed tower escapes the bounds of architecture to become a permanent fixture of the imagination. Long after the last mason put down his tools, the symbol found new life in the stories we tell. Consider the fairy tale of Rapunzel, her hair serving as the only ladder to a chamber high above the world. This is not merely a princess prison, it is a direct retelling of the medieval theme, a place of both isolation and immense latent power, accessible only through a miraculous or impossible means. Centuries later, the same motif reappears as the ivory tower, a metaphor for the world of academia perceived as deliberately isolated from the practical concerns of everyday life. In both cases, the tower's defining characteristic is its separation, its deliberate inaccessibility creating a space for something deemed either too pure or too abstract for the common world. This is not a coincidence, it is evidence of a shared symbolic language. The medieval builders did not invent the concept, they built one of its most potent and enduring expressions in stone. Their work gave tangible weight to an archetype that already lived in the human psyche, the idea of a sacred or secret space that exists just beyond ordinary reach. Artists of the modern era continue to explore this theme, sensing its mysterious power. The surrealist painter Giorgio de Chirico repeatedly populated his dreamlike cityscapes with simple, geometric towers, often arcaded and empty, casting long, enigmatic shadows. These structures are not functional buildings, they are emotional ones. They evoke a profound sense of metaphysical unease, of a reality that is familiar yet strangely silent and inaccessible. De Chirico's towers feel like questions without answers, mirroring the way a medieval doorless tower stands as a silent riddle in the landscape. This widespread cultural echo confirms that the architectural form is more than a historical curiosity. It is a key that unlocks a deeper understanding of how we represent mystery itself. The tower becomes a universal symbol for any knowledge, state of being, or truth that cannot be approached directly, but must be sought, earned, or scaled. The builders, in their wisdom, simply gave this timeless blueprint its most resilient form, ensuring its message would be read not just in stone, but in story and paint for generations to come. But symbols carved in stone leave physical traces for those who know how to look. The silent testimony of the tower's masonry provides a crucial bridge between our grand theories and the gritty reality of its construction. By examining the very fabric of the building with the tools of modern archaeology, we move from interpreting meaning to uncovering method. The type of mortar used, for instance, can be chemically analyzed to pinpoint its date of creation, revealing if a tower was built in a single campaign or grew in phases over generations. The subtle marks left by different chisels and hammers tell a story of the craftsmen themselves, their techniques evolving as the work progressed from the foundation upward. Even the foundation stones speak volumes. How deep do they go? Are they set on bedrock or on an older, pre-existing structure? Ground-penetrating radar can peer beneath the earth without moving a single stone, sometimes revealing unexpected subterranean chambers or complex foundation layouts that suggest a hidden, more practical access route has been filled in or forgotten. Perhaps a tunnel once led from a nearby building to a hatch inside the tower's base, a secret passage for initiates that rendered the high door a spiritual symbol rather than a physical necessity. The most telling evidence, however, might be found high on the wall, around that lone window serving as the entrance. If a wooden ladder was placed here repeatedly over decades or centuries, it would have left its own signature. The subtle polishing of the stone sill, microscopic scratches radiating from the point of contact, or even small, worn depressions where the ladder's feet pressed against the wall below, all these are the ghostly impressions of countless ascents. This is where the symbolic blueprint meets the worn path of daily ritual. Finding such where patterns would be like discovering the fossilized footprints of the monks or knights who used this building, confirming that the difficult ascent was not just a concept but a lived physical practice. This scientific scrutiny does not diminish the tower's mystery, it deepens it. By grounding our interpretation in the hard evidence of tool marks and material science, we begin to see the builders not as abstract philosophers, but as practical visionaries who knew exactly how to use stone and mortar to encode their deepest beliefs into a permanent, undeniable form. Every step up that ladder was a deliberate act of separation. This was not a climb in the ordinary sense, like scaling a tree or a hill. It was a choreographed departure from the horizontal plane of daily life, a vertical pilgrimage compressed into a few precarious moments. The physical experience itself was designed to induce a shift in consciousness. With each rung ascended, the familiar world of the ground, with its dirt and distractions, fell away. The climber's hands gripped rough wood, their focus narrowed to the immediate task, the body engaged in an effort that left little room for wandering thoughts. Reaching the high window was not an arrival at a destination, but the crossing of a potent threshold. The architecture forced a specific, symbolic posture. To enter, one had to contort the body, bending and squeezing through the narrow opening, a physical enactment of humility and surrender. This was a deliberate shedding of the outer self, leaving the pride and posture of the world below. Once inside, standing on the solid floor in the sudden stillness and dim light, the climber had been fundamentally reoriented. The world outside was now a framed picture, seen from a distance through a slender slit. The ritual was complete. The building had successfully extracted an individual from the flow of ordinary time and placed them into a space dedicated to a different kind of time, sacred time. This transformation was likely marked by spoken words. We can imagine a monk pausing at the base to recite a psalm, perhaps the one that begins, "I lift up my eyes to the hills." His hand on the ladder might have been a gesture of intention, a silent vow to seek a higher purpose. The final pull upward, the moment his feet left the ground, could have been accompanied by a prayer for guidance, for the strength to ascend not just the physical ladder but the spiritual one it represented. In this way, the simple act of entering became a powerful sacrament, a ceremony where the body's movements gave form to the soul's deepest longings. The tower did not just contain sacred space, it created it through the very difficulty of access, ensuring that every visit was an event, a conscious choice to turn away from the world and toward the mystery within. That solid, unbroken wall does more than block entry. It creates a profound center of gravity. The tower's most ancient symbolic role is that of the world pillar, a concept found in cultures across the globe long before the first medieval stone was laid. This is the axis mundi, the central axis of the universe, believed to connect the heavens, the earth, and the realms below. The Doorless Tower becomes a human-made version of this cosmic mountain, physically planting a stake in the ground to mark a point where the veil between worlds is thin. Its design is a perfect anatomical map of this belief. The deep foundation, often set directly on bedrock, anchors the structure firmly in the underworld, the realm of the dead and the raw powers of the earth. The soaring cylindrical shaft represents the middle world of human existence, the plane of action and experience, and the conical roof, pointing like a stone finger toward the sky, reaches for the celestial realm of the divine. Even the darkness within the thick-walled chamber echoes the mystery of the subterranean, a contained space for introspection that mirrors a journey into the depths of the self. This was not an abstract idea, it was a functional reality for the people who built it. By constructing such a tower on a specific site, often one already considered sacred, the community was doing more than just building a refuge. They were defining the spiritual center of their world, creating a permanent conduit for prayer and a fixed point around which their entire cosmos could orient itself. In a landscape without maps or street signs, the tower was the ultimate landmark, not for finding your way to the next village, but for remembering your place in the grand scheme of creation. It stood as a constant, silent reminder that the universe was not a chaotic void, but an ordered, layered reality, and that humanity occupied a crucial, if precarious, position within it. The tower was their compass, their anchor, and their ladder, all carved from the same enduring stone. A new way of seeing the world slowly turned the tower's profound language into a forgotten dialect. The Renaissance did not arrive with a sudden crash, but with a quiet shift in perspective, placing humanity, not divinity, at the center of the universe. Architects now looked not to the heavens for their blueprints, but to the ruins of ancient Rome and Greece. They sought perfect classical proportions, mathematical harmony that pleased the human eye and celebrated human reason. A building's beauty was now measured by its symmetry and its relationship to the people who used it, not by its ability to encode a secret sermon about the soul's ascent. The grand, vertical thrust of the Gothic spire was replaced by the balanced, earthbound dome. The doorless tower, with its deliberate impracticality and focus on the unseen, no longer made sense in this new intellectual climate. Its symbolic blueprint was fading from memory, becoming as illegible as a manuscript in a lost language. This philosophical earthquake was followed by the tremors of the Enlightenment, which championed reason and practicality above all else. A structure that could not be easily entered was no longer seen as spiritually profound. It was simply illogical. The very idea that a building's primary purpose was to teach a metaphysical lesson seemed like a superstitious relic of a darker age. The exclusive guilds of Masons, the keepers of the old symbolic knowledge, either dissolved or evolved into new forms like Freemasonry, which retained the tools and symbols but often detached them from their original, deeply theological context. The square and compass became emblems of moral virtue rather than instruments for uniting the earthly with the celestial. The living tradition that gave birth to the doorless tower was breaking apart, and with it, the key to its interpretation was lost. Left without their original meaning, the towers themselves began a long, slow surrender to time. The wooden ladders rotted away, never to be replaced. The stones, once precisely fitted by devout hands, were loosened by frost and ivy. They became picturesque ruins, their silent presence now seen through a romantic lens. Poets and painters admired them for their melancholy beauty, as lonely sentinels of a vanished past, but they no longer understood the sermons these stones were preaching. Historians, armed with their new empirical tools, looked at the high doors and offered a simpler, more practical explanation. They were defensive structures, they concluded, bell towers and lookout posts. This was true, but it was a partial truth, like describing a cathedral as merely a very large meeting hall. The profound layers of symbolic meaning, the reason for the design in the first place, were brushed aside as fanciful speculation. The tower's paradox had been solved by forgetting the question it was meant to ask. The silent stones of these towers speak directly to a modern hunger for authenticity. In a world saturated with digital noise and fleeting trends, their enduring presence offers a rare anchor. They are not virtual constructs but tangible proof of a mindset that saw the universe as an interconnected whole, where every stone could carry a message and every building could be a bridge to the divine. This stands in stark contrast to our often fragmented existence, where science, art, and spirituality are treated as separate, even conflicting domains. The medieval builders who raised these structures would have found such a division incomprehensible. For them, geometry was a sacred language, faith was a form of knowledge, and craftsmanship was a spiritual practice. The doorless tower is the ultimate expression of this integrated worldview, a single object that seamlessly blends architecture, astronomy, mathematics, and theology into one coherent statement. Learning to read its symbolic blueprint is not an academic exercise, it is an act of reconnecting with a lost way of seeing. It trains us to look past the obvious function of an object and ask deeper questions about the intentions and beliefs embedded within it. This skill is desperately needed today, not just for understanding old buildings, but for navigating a world filled with persuasive design, from the architecture of our cities to the invisible algorithms shaping our lives. These towers challenge us to seek out the hidden layers of meaning in our own landscape, to find the depth beneath the surface. They become icons for a modern search for purpose, reminding us that the most profound truths are often not announced with a shout, but whispered from within a carefully constructed silence. Their lesson is that meaning is not something we simply find, but something we build with intention and effort, stone by deliberate stone. This symbolic language is not locked away in history books. You can learn to read it in the stones around you. The key is to shift your perspective from tourist to interpreter, to look at an old building not as a static monument, but as a conversation frozen in time. Start by asking simple, powerful questions that the original builders would have understood. Why is this structure shaped like a circle and not a square? The form is the first clue to its intended meaning, declaring a purpose that goes beyond mere utility. Notice where the light falls at different times of day. Stand in a cathedral at noon and watch how a single sunbeam illuminates a specific carving or altar. That is not an accident. It is a deliberate act of celestial choreography meant to highlight what the community held most sacred. Trace the path a person was meant to take through the space. Is it a straight, direct line suggesting a procession, or a winding, labyrinthine route designed for contemplation? Every turn and threshold is a chapter in the story the building is telling. Look for patterns and repetitions. Do certain numbers appear again and again, like 3 arches or 12 pillars? In the medieval mind, numbers were not just quantities, they were carriers of cosmic principles. The number 3 might reference the Holy Trinity, while 12 could echo the apostles or the signs of the zodiac, weaving the earthly and the heavenly together. Pay even closer attention to the anomalies, the features that seem out of place. A strangely angled window, a carving that depicts a pagan symbol in a Christian church, a doorway that leads nowhere. These are not mistakes, they are often the most important clues, hinting at a deeper, older layer of meaning that was incorporated but not erased. A modern example might be the layout of a university campus, where the oldest building is often placed on the highest point of land, a secular echo of the spiritual ascent encoded in a medieval tower, suggesting that knowledge is the new pinnacle to strive for. Before your next visit to a castle or an old church, take a few moments to research the worldview of the people who built it, understanding that they saw the universe as an ordered, symbolic reality completely changes how you perceive their work. You are no longer just seeing pretty stained glass, you are reading a theology of light. You are not just walking down a long nave, you are reenacting a spiritual journey. This approach transforms a simple afternoon outing into a form of time travel, a detective story where you are the investigator piecing together a silent testimony. It empowers you to see the hidden dimensions in the world's oldest structures, to hear the whispers of meaning that have waited centuries for someone to ask the right questions. Rediscovering this symbolic language comes with a profound responsibility. These towers are far more than photogenic ruins for our social media feeds. They are fragile pages from a cultural manuscript written in stone. Many of these sites remain places of deep spiritual significance, not just hollow relics of a finished past. Our modern fascination must be guided by an ethic of preservation and respect, balancing the desire for access with the duty to protect. Sensitive preservation means more than just propping up crumbling walls with steel beams. It requires an approach that protects the physical structure without sanitizing its soul. Overzealous restoration can be a form of erasure, smoothing away the very wear patterns and ancient marks that tell the story of the building's true use. The subtle polish on a windowsill from 1,000 hands, the faint groove worn into a step by centuries of footfalls, these are the authentic textures of history. To replace them with pristine, machine-cut stone is to silence the whispers of the past. The goal is not to make the tower look new, but to keep its story legible for the future. This respect extends to how we, as visitors, choose to engage with these spaces. Crossing the threshold of a doorless tower, even one now accessed by a modern staircase, should feel different than entering a museum. We are walking through what was once considered a direct conduit to the divine, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. Our curiosity should be tempered with a quiet reverence. This means observing silence where it is requested, not touching fragile surfaces, and understanding that our presence is a temporary guest in a conversation that has been ongoing for a millennium. It is about listening to the silence, allowing the architecture to speak on its own terms, rather than imposing our own noise upon it. The greatest tribute we can pay to the master builders is not just to decode their symbols, but to honor the sacred intention with which they built. By visiting with mindfulness, we help ensure that these silent sermons in stone continue to teach their lessons for generations to come. These silent stone giants are not failures of design but triumphs of meaning. Our journey began with a simple architectural puzzle, a tower with no door, and unfolded into a multi-layered symbolic blueprint. We have seen how these structures encode a profound lesson in spiritual ascent, teaching that the most valued treasures require effort and intention to reach. We uncovered their role as fortresses for protected knowledge, ensuring that profound truths were earned, not given. We decoded the sacred geometry and celestial alignments that transformed them into models of cosmic order, miniature universes in stone. And finally, we discovered how this grand design reflects the microcosm of the individual soul, a personal sanctuary built from virtue and contemplation. The historian Titus Burckhardt captured this essence perfectly when he wrote that traditional architecture is a mirror of a spiritual reality. These towers are that mirror, reflecting not just the sky above but the deepest yearnings of the human heart. They challenge our modern obsession with pure function, asking us to see the intention behind the form, the sermon within the stone. So the next time you walk through your own world, pause and look up. What hidden blueprints lie in the buildings around you, in the parks, the monuments, even the layout of your own town? What silent messages have we encoded in our own age? We would love to hear your thoughts and discoveries in the comments below. If this journey into hidden history has sparked your curiosity, subscribe to the channel and join us as we continue deciphering the world's greatest mysteries, one stone at